this is what we call our integrated livestock system here. So we have 4 milk cows. We milk 2 at a time for 6 months to give them a nice long rest. And during the winter time, you know, they're locked up, and we just give them a round bale every week or so. But during the summertime, they and the pigs actually rotate out from the system, and they graze out in that paddock over there. Sometimes they're out in these fields. Sometimes they're out in some of the other areas that we'll check out later. But and then they come back here twice a day to get fed. So the pigs get fed through these feeders here, and actually ferment all the grain in 5-gallon buckets. So it's like a sourdough bread.
Yeah.
And it's the same reason that fermented bread or fermented grains are better for humans, or sprouted grains are better for us. It works the same thing for pigs. And actually you can see the difference. So my pigs they're the big black ones.
Right.
And then these other ones, there's like this brown one and this white guy here. And like the smaller pigs that don't look as nice, a friend of mine, they're moving from their farm and they needed a place for their pigs to go, so I actually decided to take them. But you can tell the difference of the food that they get and how healthy they are, and just like the color of their hair and the size of them and everything else. We ferment the feed in these buckets during the summertime out here, but in the wintertime, they would freeze, and so we actually have them inside this chicken house here. And so this is where the permaculture design differs from just regular organic agriculture, or even regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture. Is this is those feed buckets here. So this stuff, I actually add in the milk and any extra whey or any products from the dairy cows, from the cheese making or anything like that. We mix it in there, and it helps to ferment the grains and adds a bunch of nutrients for the pigs and stuff like that. The chickens also get fermented feed in these tubs once a day. But coming back to the idea of design, what makes our farm so different is we can pop out here, the permaculture design is based on how ecosystems function. And so if you think about it, based on what we know about the planet Earth right now, is that it's been around for 3 or 4 billion years, and it has functioned essentially flawlessly during that time, constantly increasing in complexity, resiliency, productivity, despite constant setbacks from asteroids, from supervolcanoes, from solar flares. Current scientists basically talk about, actually right now it's pretty common in the media right now, is the Earth is in its 6th mass extinction event, and humans are the cause of that 6th mass extinction event. Well, that statement is actually incredibly hopeful for 2 reasons. The first is that, the planet's already been destroyed 5 times.
Right.
And that 5 times it's come back. And based on the fossil record, it comes back even better each time in terms of the diversity of species, the complexity of those life forms. And these mass extinction events, we're talking at least 50% of the species alive at that time were wiped out. At one point, it was like 97% of the species were destroyed.
Wow.
But it keeps coming back. There's this force in the universe that wants life to live. And the second reason why the idea of a 6th mass extinction event is so hopeful is that humans are the cause of it. And so we're actually going against one of the most powerful forces of the universe, and we're winning.
Well, that's an interesting way of spinning it, I guess. Yeah.
So if this kind of comes back to my philosophy about, and this is the whole idea of permaculture, is that humans can be just as productive as we are destructive.
Right.
Or just as regenerative as we are degenerative. And so that's really the whole basis behind permaculture is what are the forces or the processes that are at play that allowed, like at one point our Earth didn't even exist. It was just a bunch of dust that coalesced around, the gravitational pull of our sun, and then the gas is cooled, and everybody knows that story. It's like, what are the processes that turned nothing into something?
Yeah.
And can those processes be partnered with? So modern agriculture, or actually agriculture for the last 10,000 years, the modus operandi has been to try to control those processes, to try to force them into
Right.
for example, annual agriculture, the growing of grains, stemmed from a natural process, which was it originated along the Nile in Egypt, where the rivers would flood, depositing a layer of silt, and then annual grasses or grains or legumes that were transported in that silt would germinate, and you could get a crop. It was literally free food.
Right.
And so we, as the intelligent species that we were, saw that, and we partnered with it, and we tried to augment it. But we made a mistake when we tried to take that pattern and we moved it all over the world, and we tried to create the disturbance regime that happened on the Nile when there wasn't a Nile. So we came to North America, actually all over the world. We basically deforested these productive ecosystems that were functioning with no inputs, and we tried to create that disturbance regime with the plow or with herbicides or things like that, and then throw seeds in the ground to get them to germinate, to control that natural pattern, but we took it out of context. And so one of the ideas in permaculture design is that everywhere in the world has an appropriate ecosystem that is the most productive, the most stable, the most efficient that is possible given all of the different factors of that area.
Right.
The sunlight, the climate, the organisms that are there, the soil type. Basically, for billions of years of trial and error and biological evolution, these ecosystems have evolved to find that their biome, their climax ecosystem.
Right.
And so we as a species now can come in and we can basically try to mimic that climax ecosystem. And it turns out there's actually some pretty simple rules or principles that you can use to copy that. And there's at least 5 of them. And the 5 that we use on our farm to try to partner with those ecosystem processes is I call them the 5 rules of design. So the first rule of trying to design basically an ecosystem that functions just like a natural ecosystem would be, is that every actually backing up a bit, within an ecosystem you can think of all these different elements. And so elements are plants, animals, structures, geological features, basically any separate component within an ecosystem that's an actor or can influence or be influenced by the system. And each of those elements contribute something to the system, and they get something from the system. So they have needs and they have yields.
Right.
So within coming back to the rules of design now, is that a healthy ecosystem, every need of every element that isn't facilitated from within the system results in work. So if these chickens need food and they can't get it from the system,
That's work.
I have to work.
Yeah.
I have to grow grain for them to feed them. So you can see these chickens right now, they're scratching around. They're getting food, they're getting one of their needs from the system, and it's actually a byproduct from the system. So this straw came from an organic farm down the road. It's organic wheat straw. And the combine missed some of the grains because there's always some loss. And that would be a lost asset or a waste product. But because we've positioned these two elements, the straw and the chickens together, these chickens now are able to actually come in and harvest that all of themselves without any work from us apart from putting the straw there, which we had to do anyways because we were trying to use the straw to capture the nutrients from our cows. So this whole thing is going to spiral up in a minute here, and it gets pretty complex. But come back to these rules. So the first rule is any need of an element that you cannot facilitate. It cannot facilitate from within the system results in work. The second is that any yield of an element that cannot be used by the system results in pollution. So if take the chicken manure for example, you just walked in there, it didn't smell bad. You wouldn't want that to be your living room or anything like that.
No.
But it wasn't an awful,
No, well, I used to catch chickens for the local Mennonites.
Yeah.
20,000 chickens. You bring them out like a dozen at a time.
Yeah.
And you would cough up ammonia out of your lungs for the next 2 days. So,
Totally.
Yeah, there was none of that in there
So-
at all. It was like I've never smelt a cleaner chicken barn, to be honest.
So that smell, that ammonia, is actually one of the yields of the chickens. It's one of the resources that they give. It's fertilizer. Ammonia is what is like NH3 or NH4 or whatever, right? That's fertilizer. That's one of the three primary ingredients of agriculture in terms of
Yeah,
NP and K. And so because
and it's not doing any good in my lungs.
No. And so because in a large barn, or if you've ever smelled like a hog barn or a dairy barn, if you smell that, if you smell shit,
Yeah.
it's literally a resource that's being lost because it's off gassing and you're breathing it in.
Yeah.
And that's could be a need of something else in the system. Annual crops need fertilizer. Gardens need fertilizer. So with the chickens, they produce manure. So do all the other elements here. But they also produce scratching. They produce heat. They produce other chickens. They produce eggs. If any of those yields that an element has for the system, if it can't be put to productive use, it results in pollution. So
Right.
if their manure can't be put to productive use, it results in ammonia.
Yeah.
When the chicken catchers go in,
Pollutes my
it
lungs.
pollutes their lungs, but it also pollutes the chicken's lungs. Can you imagine being
yeah.
a chicken and living in that environment?
Oh, yeah.
So that's why these chickens get all these diseases. And so this is where we get to the next, the third rule of design, is that anytime a system has an excess of pollution, it results in actually. Oh, sorry, I can't remember what they were now. Needs and yields. Oh shit! It's been a while
Right, I
since
can cut this.
it's been a while since I gave a tour. It's needs and yields. I can't remember where it all goes. Oh, that's right. So when the resource of the manure can't be put to productive use, it creates pollution. But the interesting thing is the relationship between the first two rules in that whenever you get pollution, you'll get work, and whenever you get work, you get pollution.
Gotcha.
So when those chickens their chicken house is filled with ammonia, it makes them sick, and then they need antibiotics.
Right.
They need medicated feed.
Yeah.
And this whole thing spirals out of control. But the whole reason why the ammonia got to be a pollution was because the system wasn't designed well and it couldn't be put to productive use. So because there wasn't a need for that nitrogen somewhere else, it wasn't valued. And so they didn't put straw down to try to capture it because it was just a waste product. They didn't have a use for it. And so, but if your system isn't designed well, even if you do put down straw, you kind of get into this situation where, and growing up on a farm, I'm sure you had this, if you had animals, is the more straw you put down, the more often you have to clean the chicken house.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to put straw down because it creates work.
Right.
But because you don't value the manure, you don't realize that it's not actually work. It's productive work. It's not drudgery.
Right.
It's actually
It's a resource.
It's a
not
resource.
yeah.
And so, because the system wasn't designed well, you get into this terrible spiral where the more polluted the system gets, the more work it gets, and the more work there is, the less time you have to make use of resources, and the whole thing turns into chaos, basically. So those are the first two rules of design. The third rule is that every element serves multiple functions. So, these chickens, they aren't just there to produce eggs.
Right.
They're part of my integrated pest management system. So when they're walking around and scratching through all the manure piles of the pigs and the cows, they're actually eating parasites that would negatively impact the health of my cows and pigs. These chickens are also part of the system in that their body heat is put to productive use, keeping this chicken house warm so that I can ferment my pig feed all during the winter without any fossil fuels whatsoever. So this building never goes below freezing.
Right.
Even when it was minus 45 here this year, this building didn't freeze because each chicken gives off like 7 BTUs.
Wow. Okay.
So we've got a livestock water over there. It is an electric one. We've got some non-electric ones that we're going to be replacing them with, which are also really well designed in that they use the Earth's heat to keep the water from freezing. But that same water waters my pigs, my cows, and my chickens. So every element serves multiple functions.
Right.
It's just like in an ecosystem. Now the fourth rule of design is that every function is served by multiple elements. So if you have something that's essential to the system, you should have multiple ways of providing that. So water is an essential part of this system. Without it, all these elements would die. Feed is an essential part of the system. Without it, any one of these animals would die. Protection from the elements is an essential function from this ecosystem, and otherwise these organisms would die. And so we try to provide all those needs with as many ways as possible. So, for example, one way the animals can get water is from that livestock water there. There's also a water hydrant over there that I can use. There's also a pond right over there that during the summertime the animals can use. There's also snow that the animals are able to eat. We've got a gravity water system that we'll go check out later that actually brings water, not just from, we're not pumping water from underground, we're actually catching water from snow melts and spring runoff, harvesting it in dams and then reticulating that through the property, using gravity to pressurize the system. So we've got good design is it's multifunctional, it's adaptive, it's efficient, it's effective, it's ethical. You can see all these animals are really happy. They're living out their function in an ecosystem as if they would in the wild. And then we get to the fifth rule of design, which is that if you break any of those first four rules, you will get drudgery, you'll get pollution.
Right.
So if you don't have a system that is multifunctional, then when the water breaks down, your animals are going to die, or you're going to have to do a bunch of work. You have to haul water from somewhere else.
Right.
If the pigs can't, if their manure can't be put to productive use on our grain land that's right next door, you're going to run into problems there. So that's essentially how, using those 5 rules and just a basic understanding of ecosystem functioning, we as an element in the system can arrange other elements in space. So where they're located across the property, we can locate them in time. What time of year are they there? What time do we let the chickens out? Do we let them out when it's minus 40 or not? There's also a form aspect, which is, what kind of a breed of animals do we use? So you can see we've got, 3 or 4 different breeds of chickens here. And part of that is just, multifunctionality and trying to see what animals are doing best. Where's I going with that? Can't remember now. Anyways, this is what we're trying to emulate with our management, and this is just a microcosm or an example of everything else that's happening on this farm. Like there are literally thousands of interactions that are happening within this system that I don't even realize are happening. And we're getting all these benefits. Like, not only are these animals happy and healthy, they're producing nutrient dense food that we're selling to customers, but we're doing it with minimal inputs. So we are still feeding these pigs and these chickens and these cows, and we are doing some work, but it's very productive. And this straw is not just to capture nutrients. It provides bedding for the chickens. It provides something for them to do during the wintertime. Most farms, if they do free range their chickens and their pigs, for 6 months of the year in our climate, there's nothing for those animals to do because it's frozen solids.
Right.
So because all these elements are located in the right location at the right time, in the right form, and in the right scale, we get all these benefits from the elements. And so the scale piece, that was the fourth one, which is really important, is that this wouldn't work if I had 1,000 chickens.
Right.
And I only had the same amount of pigs. I'd have to scale everything else up.
Right.
And if I had 1,000 pigs, they would overgraze the area around them within walking distance. And so the whole thing would collapse. So we usually raise 30 pigs. We have about 4 milk cows and 150 to 200 chickens. That's an appropriate scale for the size of the system. If it gets any bigger, I'd have to design the system differently so that it would be mobile. Otherwise, they would outstrip their resource areas. And so this is essentially what permaculture design is all about, is trying to produce, there's three ethics. It's how do we care for people and human flourishing? How do we do that, and how do we achieve that human flourishing in a way that's good for the planet and all their organisms? And how do we do that in a way that allows future generations the same opportunities or better than we have? So it's earth care, people care, future care. Those are the ethics that this whole system is based upon, and basically the 5 rules that I just mentioned. And from there, you can apply this anywhere in the world to achieve the most productive agricultural systems and the most, it's beyond sustainable, it's actually regenerative. Every year this system gets better. More healthy.
I love that. It's like anti-fragile.
It's absolutely.
It's not just resilient. It's anti-fragile.
It's anti-fragile. It goes beyond that. Yeah. And these systems are very difficult to establish, just in the way that it took billions of years for the Earth to establish. But once it's there, I mean, it's like you can't knock the Earth out. Until our sun goes basically supernova, there's nothing that can kill. At one point, I think a planet basically collided with. There's one of the theories that a planet collided with the Earth. A chunk broke off. That's our moon now.
Right.
It's like you can't knock the Earth out. It's going to get better every year, but despite that, we are seeing in 2015 that statement, the Earth's in its 6th mass extinction event. That comes from scientific research from I think it's Science Advances in 2015, where they've studied the background rate of extinctions, and they're like 1,000 times the rate that they are normally. And they believe that the anthropogenic, basically biodiversity loss, is the cause of that. And agriculture is probably one of the biggest contributing factors to that. But that's not to say that humans are bad and that's the only way that it can be. We're showing it on our farm, and there's now permaculture properties on every single inhabited continent across the world, showing how we can go beyond this. How do we do less bad ideology for humans to how do we do more good? And
right, I love it. So it's like, how can humans be part of the regenerative process?
Yes.
It's not just about minimizing our impact on the earth, it's about maximizing it in a way that regenerates the earth.
There's a fellow, Larry Santoyo, he says it's not about minimizing your footprint, it's about maximizing your handprint.
Right.
And as soon as you get that philosophy, it's like all the 7 billion people on the planet, that's not a problem, that's a solution. It's like, what could the world be like if 7 billion people were
practice this philosophy?
We're doing this every day. It's like there's no telling how much human flourishing, how much well-being the world could have, and it just keeps getting better. Like it's amazing, and it's fun. Like these are. In the same way that these chickens scratching around, that's not work for them. Like you couldn't stop a chicken from scratching.
Yeah.
And I think for humans, part of our role as an organism is we're one of my friends called it we are multi-species negotiators. Yeah. We get to go between all these different elements and say, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And what do you have? And basically organize all these relationships and manage ecosystems. And when we do that well, it's amazing. When we do it poorly, we get, the feedlots, the CAFOs, the chicken barns, and all the negative consequences that we're all aware of. But it's not about, there's another saying, is it's not the cow, it's the how. Cows aren't causing global warming. There are more bison in North America than there are beef cattle today.
Really? I did not know that.
But those cows weren't being locked in feedlots,
Right.
or those grazing animals. They were rotating around. They were building soil, and so we can totally get back to these points where these ecosystems were unbelievably productive. And there's actually no telling how good things can get. So it's incredibly hopeful, but it takes time. But the cool thing is, once it gets started, you get all these. One of the properties of complex systems is that they have emergent characteristics that you could have never predicted.
Right.
And so this whole thing started with, I wanted my pigs and my cows to be together because my pigs didn't do anything all winter long.
Yeah.
They slept and they ate. And I put them together, and then there's all these amazing interactions. And then I brought my chickens in, and there's even more interactions. And so now, we're feeding our pigs a fraction of the grain that most hog barn pigs get raised. So grain is a very energy intensive resource. We're feeding our chickens way less grain. They actually all eat each other's manure. The chickens eat the pig manure. The cows eat the chicken. These are all natural processes. But when we have these farms where all these elements are broken apart, you have nothing but work, and you have nothing but pollution.
Right.
And so we're getting exactly what you would expect from our agriculture right now, and it's not going to change until we do. For 200 years, we've been, mineralizing ecosystems, cutting down trees, draining wetlands, disturbing soil, trying to grow annual crops. And there's nothing wrong with annual crops on a certain scale, but at a certain point, it becomes a source of pollution and drudgery. And so we talked about climax ecosystems as the most productive, stable, anti-fragile systems that you can have for producing our food, fiber, fuel, and pharmaceuticals, which is the function of agriculture, which allows civilization to take part. When we ask ourselves, what's the best way to do that? The answer is always, no matter where you are in the world, mimic your climax ecosystem. What does the land want to be, and how do you help it become it? So if we were to walk away from our land and do nothing for a couple hundred years, what this land would turn into would be called an Aspen parkland biome, which is characterized by groves of trees and grasslands. That's what the land wants to be based on the soil type, the rainfall, the types of animals that were here. That's just what it wants. And so when we started to redesign our farm based on the ecological principles, we said, well, how do we mimic that? Like, if that's what our land wants to be, why are we fighting it? Why every year are we tilling the ground and planting grains and only cutting grass across a whole quarter section for hay? What if we fast-tracked succession? What if it wants to be an Aspen parkland, groves of trees with grasslands, what if we just did that? What if we planted groves of trees and had grasslands? So we're standing right now in a grove of trees that we planted, and above us and below us is a grassland. Except the trees that we're standing amongst here and the shrubs and stuff aren't aspens and spruce trees, which have little to no value apart from fuel. These are apples, plums, pears, apricots, black walnuts, cherries, haskaps, saskatoons, raspberries, red currants, black currants, hazelnuts. There's over 30 different species of fruit, nut, and berry trees that are growing in this forest garden ecosystem, and they're all designed and planted to help facilitate each other's needs and yields. So the things that like shade are planted on the north side underneath canopy trees. The things that like full sun are on the front side. The things that need a lot of moisture are planted against this swale mound here. And so this is essentially what we're standing on is a ditch on contour. So any runoff that melts during the spring runoff or rainfall that would run down slope, it'll run to this ditch, almost like the gutter of the estraus of your house, and it'll be forced to back up, and it'll slow spread and infiltrate the flow of water across the entire landscape. And again, this is mimicking ecosystems. This is what our wetlands used to do, but we drained all those. And so what we did is we basically got topographical maps. We found where all these wetlands used to be, and we just connected the dots with this swale on contour, this ditch. And now we're able to capture literally millions of gallons of water every year from snow runoff on our farm. Wow. All that water helps to infiltrate our trees and grow the pastures below. The trees help to shelter the wind from the livestock. They also help to capture more snow, which means you get more water, which means you can grow more trees. And suddenly you get this thing called an upward spiral. Every year it gets better and better and better. Right. Versus our current agricultural system, if you look over at that hill over here, every year that farm across the road gets worse and worse and worse. There's less soil health, less water security, less biodiversity, and less solar capture.
That bare hill there.
That bare hill there. It used to be solid trees, and they're going the opposite direction, and they're taking huge amounts of energy to try to manage a system into the ground. So, one of the only inputs on our farm is fossil fuels right now. We use about 2 to 4 gallons of diesel per acre. We farm about 350 acres right now. We own 250. We rent another 100. So yeah, 2 to 4 gallons of diesel per acre. The farm across the road, just in their fertilizer use alone, they're applying 100 pounds of diesel per acre in terms of energy, calorie for calorie. Wow. And that's just the nitrogen. Then you get, your potassium and phosphorus, and you get they're spraying 5 or 6 times a year, all the harvesting, everything else. So when we look at this, just not in terms of what's moral or anything like that, it's just what is sustainable under like the actual definition of physics, and that the energy in versus energy out and all this stuff is these systems, there's 10 to 20 units of energy going in for 1 calorie coming out. Right. And every year it gets worse. And on our farm, every year it gets better. And every year we use less fossil fuels, and eventually we won't use
calories
and more calories out.
Yeah. And then you get into the
and you could relate that, I would imagine, that there should be a translation from that to profit as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Profitability.
Oh yeah, like we are. So I can't remember what university did. I think it was Manitoba. They did like a gross profit analysis for all the different crops of agriculture right now. And if you actually factor in all of the labor costs, the insurance, or land rental costs, machinery depreciation, everything like that, there's only 2 crops that were actually in the black, and that was canola and I think hemp seed was the only 2 crops. Everything else was with per acre profits were negative. You actually lost money if you factored in all your costs every year. Now, so you wonder, well, how are these farmers, like if we live in a capitalistic economy with a free economy, how are these guys not gone?
Losing their shirts.
Yeah, how are they not eliminated from the system? Well, one of them is through inflation of land prices. And so they basically coast for 30 or 40 years, making nothing, hoping that the price of their land increases to, so they can sell to the next generation for more and more money.
Yeah, my dad just sold his farm for like over $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, we could never have imagined when he moved off the farm 20 years ago. No. That he'd be getting $1 million for it. I mean,
no. And so the other way is through government subsidization.
Right.
So I don't think those university spreadsheets factored in all of the carbon credits, the exemptions, all the other stuff that these farmers get.
The bailouts.
The bailouts basically, and so But the interesting thing is that every generation, when the land is sold, it's sold for a higher price, but they're getting less value for it.
Right. And the other thing too, I imagine, is the supply management, the regulations, right? Like we're going to talk in a bit about how you're not allowed to sell your meat.
Yeah.
And these other big factory farms are, right? And so that prices the competition out of the market.
Yes, exactly.
Or it runs them out of the market. Yeah. Just forcibly through billy clubs.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this whole idea about sustainable agriculture is a complete joke when you look at it. And then the other line that they throw out is, well, it's so great what you guys are doing, but it'll never feed the world. And which I mean is a complete joke, because well, how long is that? Like, even if it was feeding the world, which is not, because when is the last time you ate a bowl of canola?
Right.
Never. But even if it was feeding the world, how long can it do it for before it runs out?
Yeah.
Before it either runs out of topsoil, water biodiversity, or the capacity to actually capture solar energy, and it becomes a non-issue. So we desperately need a new agricultural system, and I'm not criticizing these farmers because they have been enabled and actually in a lot of ways forced by the government to get big or get out. The FCC for years has forced farmers into more debt just so that they can afford to make payments on what they've got right now. And so and also consumers have demanded cheaper and cheaper food. So there's a lot of factors in here. It's not just the farmers that are to blame here, but we do need to start having a conversation about how we're feeding ourselves, because we eat 2 to 3 meals a day, and without that, everything goes to shit. And we've got to figure it out. But there are solutions, and they're not, let's kill half the population or let's move to Mars or whatever. It's no, let's look back at what's worked for literally billions of years and copy that.